You're fired. Pack your things. Fletcher slowly set down his wrench. Sir, can I at least know why? Why? Because you're 6 years of dead weight. Preston ripped the badge from Fletcher's neck and dropped it into the trash. An illiterate grease janitor who got lucky. And you smell like one. Fletcher didn't flinch. Get out of my building before I have security drag you out. Fletcher looked at his badge in the trash, then at the Atlas line humming behind Preston. He reached in, took it, and walked out. But in 19 days, the man Preston called a grease rat would be the only one who could save his machine. Have you ever watched a man walk back into the building that threw him away and make every suit in the room go silent? Because you're about to. So, drop a comment, hit that like, and let me take you back to where it all started. Fletcher Boyd walked out of Greyfield Industries for the last time on a Tuesday afternoon in October. He didn't slam the door. He didn't curse or make a scene. He carried his toolbox in one hand and his crumpled badge in his jacket pocket. 6 years of his life sat in his chest like a stone he couldn't swallow. The parking lot stretched out, gray and empty beneath a flat sky. 2 workers near the loading dock looked over, then quickly turned away. Nobody said goodbye. Nobody said anything at all. That was the thing about being erased. It happened so quietly that even the people watching could pretend they didn't see it. Fletcher set his toolbox in the trunk of his 12-year-old Civic. The paint was peeling along the hood. The heat barely worked, but the car ran because Fletcher kept it running. That was what he did. He kept things running. He sat behind the wheel for a long time. Then he called home. Daddy, are you coming early? Naomi's voice hit him like warm water. 8 years old. She could multiply 3-digit numbers in her head and draw machines from memory after seeing them once. His daughter. His whole world. Yeah, baby girl. Coming home late today. Can we make spaghetti? Make it whatever you want. He hung up before his voice cracked. The drive took 25 minutes. Fletcher spent every one of them rehearsing what he'd say. But when he walked through the door and Naomi threw her arms around his waist, he said nothing at all. He picked her up, carried her to the kitchen, and they made spaghetti together. 3 months earlier, Greyfield Industries had been a different company. Built over 4 decades, Greyfield had earned its reputation in precision manufacturing, custom hydraulic systems, industrial automation rigs, and one crown jewel that separated them from every competitor within 500 m, the Atlas line. The Atlas line was a fully integrated production system capable of manufacturing, testing, and calibrating hydraulic components in a single automated sequence. No other facility in the region had anything close. The Atlas line was why Henderson Corporation had signed a $12 million annual contract. It was why Greyfield appeared in trade journals. It was the heartbeat of the entire operation. Fletcher Boyd had built the entire thing. Not managed it. Not consulted on it. Built it. Every gear. Every sensor. Every line of diagnostic code. 3 years of his life poured into that system. From the first rough sketch on a napkin in the break room to the final calibration test that ran clean on the first attempt, the old plant manager, Gene Crawford, Diane Crawford's father, had given Fletcher the space and the trust to build something extraordinary. Gene never cared about degrees. He cared about what your hands could do and what your head could see. Fletcher Boyd could see things in a machine that most engineers needed $1 million in diagnostic equipment to find. But Gene retired 18 months ago, and while Fletcher's title remained senior maintenance technician, nobody above Diane Crawford's level knew who really built the Atlas line. The blueprints sat in a filing cabinet. Fletcher's name wasn't on them. Nobody had ever asked. Then Preston Hargrove walked in. Preston came from the finance division of a holding company that had acquired Greyfield in a portfolio deal. 30 years in mergers, acquisitions, and what he called operational streamlining. He had never turned a wrench, never spent a full shift on a factory floor, never heard the difference between a machine running and one choking on borrowed time. What Preston understood was cost reduction, headcount, efficiency ratios. And within his first week at Greyfield, he identified what he called the company's biggest liability: legacy overhead. Legacy overhead. That was Preston's polished phrase for the experienced workers who'd been at Greyfield more than 5 years. Within his first 6 weeks, Preston eliminated 8 positions. 6 of those workers were black. 1 was Latino. The 8th was the only white foreman who had formally objected to the changes. Preston never said the word race. He didn't need to. The vocabulary was always clean. Modernizing the talent pipeline. Bringing in credentialed professionals. Aligning our workforce with industry benchmarks. Clean words. Clean suits. Dirty results. Fletcher watched it happen from the factory floor. He watched Darnell Williams get replaced after 9 years on the hydraulic press. 9 years of perfect safety records. 9 years of never missing a single shift. Darnell's replacement was a 24-year-old with a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering who had never operated a hydraulic press outside a university simulation. He watched Sheila Monroe get cut from quality control. 12 years of experience. She could spot a microfracture in a titanium housing unit with her bare eyes, no magnification. Her replacement brought a laptop loaded with diagnostic software and couldn't tell a stress fracture from a surface scratch. He watched Terrence Oakes pack his locker in silence, jaw locked, eyes straight ahead. 19 years at Greyfield erased in a 10-minute meeting. Terrence didn't shake anyone's hand on the way out. He just walked, because that was how you survived it. You kept moving and you didn't look back because looking back meant letting them see what they'd taken from you. The factory floor felt different after that. The noise was the same, hydraulic presses cycling, conveyor belts humming, the Atlas line running its eternal rhythm. But the air had changed. People stopped talking in the break room when certain doors opened. Eye contact became a calculation. Every friendly nod from management now carried a second question underneath. Am I next? Fletcher noticed something else. The new hires, all of them white, all of them young, all of them carrying degrees like shields, moved through the plant differently. They walked the center of every hallway. They didn't nod at the workers who'd been there for years. They spoke in a language designed to exclude: throughput matrices, value stream mapping, human capital optimization. Words that meant nothing on a factory floor but sounded expensive in a boardroom. Preston held a company-wide meeting in his third week. He stood at the front of the cafeteria in a suit that cost more than most workers earned in a month and talked about Greyfield's future. I want to be transparent, Preston said, scanning the room with a smile that had no warmth in it. This company has been running on legacy systems and legacy thinking. We need talent that matches the direction we're heading. Credentialed, innovative, forward-looking professionals. He never said the word black. He didn't need to. Everyone in that cafeteria could do the math. The people being shown the door had dark skin and decades of experience. The people replacing them had light skin and laminated diplomas. Fletcher raised his hand. Mr. Hargrove, with respect, the Atlas line runs at 98% efficiency. That's higher than any comparable system in the industry. What exactly are we modernizing? Preston looked at Fletcher the way a man looks at a stain on his shoe. I appreciate the enthusiasm, Fletcher. But let's leave strategic decisions to the people qualified to make them. The cafeteria was silent. 200 people heard it. Not one of them said a word. Diane Crawford found Fletcher at his workstation afterward. She was pale. I know what he's doing, she whispered. I've been documenting everything. The termination patterns, the hiring replacements, the language in his internal memos. I don't have the power to stop it. Nobody does, Fletcher said. That's the point. Fletcher told himself he was different. He built the Atlas line. That had to count for something. It didn't. The day Garrett Sullivan walked through the front door, Fletcher felt it in his gut before his mind caught up. Garrett was everything Preston wanted the world to see. 28 years old. MIT graduate. 3 patents in automated manufacturing systems. He had a handshake that lasted exactly 2 seconds and a smile that said he already knew the answer to every question you might ask. He spoke about factory systems the way a tourist describes a city from a guidebook, with total confidence and no understanding of the streets. Fletcher right, Garrett said on his first morning, barely glancing at the name tag. I'll be running the Atlas line going forward. Preston wants a more strategic approach. Fletcher tried to hand over what he could. He walked Garrett through the custom calibration sequences. He explained the harmonic dampeners that ran on a frequency pattern Fletcher had engineered specifically for the Atlas line's resonance profile. He showed him panel 9, where the self-diagnostic module was tucked away. He explained the 300-cycle thermal drift on the left bank that required a manual reset. No schematic documented it. He tried to explain that this machine had a language that it spoke to anyone willing to listen. Garrett gave him 10 minutes. Then he raised a palm. I appreciate the enthusiasm, Fletcher. Really? His smile tightened. But I have 3 patents in this exact field. I think I can figure out a production line. A production line? 3 years of Fletcher's life reduced to 4 words. 2 days later, Preston called Fletcher to the corner office. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Preston didn't stand. He didn't offer a chair. He slid a manila envelope across the desk the way you'd push trash toward a bin. That night, after Naomi fell asleep clutching her popsicle stick bridge project, Fletcher sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills. Rent was due in 11 days. Naomi's after-school program cost $400 a month. His mother's prescriptions in Alabama needed refilling. His savings account held enough for 6 weeks, maybe 5 if anything broke. 6 weeks? That was the distance between Fletcher Boyd and the floor. He looked at the kitchen faucet dripping into the sink. He'd meant to fix it for weeks. Tonight, the hands that built the Atlas line couldn't seem to grip the wrench. If this story already makes your blood boil, hit that subscribe button because what Fletcher Boyd does next will change everything. Fletcher Boyd learned how to listen before he learned how to read. His grandfather, Earl Boyd, ran a small repair shop behind a shotgun house in Montgomery, Alabama. It wasn't the kind of shop with a sign out front or a listing in the yellow pages. Just a cinder block garage where people from the neighborhood brought whatever was broken. Lawnmowers, window fans, car engines that had been declared dead by 3 other mechanics. Earl fixed them all. He had hands like leather and a voice like gravel. And he believed with absolute certainty that every machine had a voice. You hear that, Fletch? he'd say, pressing 6-year-old Fletcher's palm flat against the hood of a sputtering Buick. That rattle ain't random. She's telling you exactly what's wrong. You just got to learn her language. Fletcher learned. By 10, he could disassemble a carburetor and rebuild it blindfolded. By 12, he was rewiring electrical panels for neighbors who couldn't afford a licensed electrician. By 16, he was rebuilding transmission systems that certified mechanics had given up on. Earl never charged what the work was worth. Fixing things ain't about getting rich, he'd tell Fletcher over cold sweet tea at the end of a long Saturday. It's about making something right that somebody else gave up on. You fix it once, you fix it right, and you fix it so it fixes itself. Fix it once, fix it right, fix it so it fixes itself. That was Earl's motto. It became the operating principle behind every machine Fletcher ever touched. Earl died when Fletcher was 19. Heart attack on the garage floor halfway through rebuilding a neighbor's washing machine motor. Fletcher found him on the concrete, still holding a socket wrench in his left hand. The motor was almost finished. Fletcher completed it that afternoon through tears because that was what Earl would have wanted. You don't leave a job half-won. College was never an option. Not because Fletcher lacked the mind. His teachers all said the same thing. This kid could go anywhere. But anywhere cost money. His mother worked double shifts as a home health aide. His father had left before Fletcher's second birthday. There was no fund, no scholarship waiting in rural Montgomery for a quiet black kid who was better with machines than standardized tests. So Fletcher taught himself. Library books, online forums, discarded technical manuals pulled from recycling bins behind the community college. He read everything he could find about hydraulics, pneumatics, electrical systems, and industrial automation. He learned by doing. He learned by breaking things and putting them back together better than before. He learned the way Earl had taught him, by listening. At 26, Fletcher moved north. He'd heard Greyfield Industries was hiring maintenance staff. The posting asked for a high school diploma and a willingness to work early shifts. Fletcher had both. On his third day, a compressor on the main floor seized. It was an old Kessler rotary screw unit that had been failing for months. 2 outside contractors had examined it. Both recommended full replacement at a cost of $90,000. Fletcher asked Gene Crawford if he could take a look. Gene studied him for a moment. Then he handed over the keys to the maintenance cage. It took Fletcher 4 hours. He found a micro crack in the intake valve housing that both contractors had missed. He fabricated a replacement part from spare stock, recalibrated the pressure system, and turned the compressor on. It ran cleaner than the day it was installed. Gene Crawford watched the pressure gauges settle into perfect readings and said nothing for a long time. Then he looked at Fletcher. Who taught you to do that? My grandfather. He must have been one hell of a mechanic. Yes, sir, he was. From that day forward, Gene gave Fletcher access to everything. Not on paper. Corporate would never have approved a maintenance technician without a degree touching design work. But Gene Crawford didn't care about paper. He cared about results. And Fletcher delivered results the way rain delivers water, consistently, quietly, and in quantities nobody expected. Over the next 3 years, Fletcher designed and built the Atlas line from the ground up. He sketched initial plans on graph paper during lunch breaks. He tested prototypes alone on the factory floor after midnight. He solved problems that would have taken a credentialed team months to untangle. He never put his name on the blueprints. Gene told him to. Fletcher said it didn't matter. The machine works, he said. That's what matters. It was Earl talking. Fix it right. Let the work speak for itself. The work spoke. But the people who needed to hear it most had already stopped listening. It took exactly 18 days. 18 days for the Atlas line to begin tearing itself apart. It started small. A calibration drift on the third actuator bank, output tolerances shifting by 0.2%. Garrett Sullivan flagged it, adjusted the parameters, and filed a report calling it a routine fluctuation. 3 days later the drift doubled, then tripled. Then the thermal sensors on the left bank started throwing fault codes that didn't match anything in the manufacturer's database. These error codes aren't in any documentation, Garrett told Diane Crawford on day 12. The polish in his voice had dulled. I've contacted every component supplier. Nothing matches. That's because the system isn't standard, Diane said. Fletcher built it custom. Then where are his design documents? You'd have to ask Fletcher. Garrett didn't ask Fletcher. His pride sat between him and that phone call like a locked door. Instead, Garrett called his MIT classmates. He flew in a former lab partner who specialized in automated hydraulic systems. The lab partner spent 2 days running diagnostics, shook his head, and flew home. The architecture doesn't match anything I've studied, he told Garrett on the way out. It's like someone built a language from scratch and didn't write a dictionary. Garrett called 3 outside engineering firms. Each one sent their best people. Each one ran into the same wall. The Atlas line wasn't broken the way standard systems break. It was built differently than anything in any textbook, and fixing it required understanding how it thought. Only one person in the world had that understanding. And Garrett had watched Preston throw him in the trash. The factory floor felt the crisis before the spreadsheets showed it. Workers on the downstream assembly station stood idle for hours, waiting for parts that used to flow like clockwork. The hum of the Atlas line, once steady and clean, now stuttered and coughed. Machines break loudly or quietly. The Atlas line was doing something worse. It was breaking slowly, like a body giving out one organ at a time. By day 14, the Atlas line was losing calibration mid-cycle. Finished components were failing quality checks at a rate of 31%. Henderson Corporation's contract specified a defect tolerance under 2%. Production output had dropped by more than half. On day 16, Henderson Corporation's procurement director called Lawrence Keating directly. Keating was chairman of Greyfield's board. He'd founded the company 42 years ago. He was 81, sharp as a scalpel and allergic to surprises. Lawrence, if these numbers don't turn around in 2 weeks, we invoke the exit clause. That's $12 million walking out your door. Keating called an emergency board meeting for the following morning. The boardroom seated 14. That morning every chair was full. Lawrence Keating sat at the head of the table with a face like carved stone. Preston Hargrove stood at the front with a slide deck that had been revised 4 times since midnight. He wore his best suit. His voice was steady. His hands were not. The Atlas line is undergoing a recalibration phase, Preston said, clicking to a production graph. The line plummeted like a cliff edge. This is expected during any systems transition. Garrett Sullivan is implementing improvements that will bring output back to baseline within what? Keating's voice sliced through the room like a saw through pine. A month? A quarter? Henderson isn't waiting. Their procurement director called me at home yesterday. At home, Preston. That hasn't happened in 42 years. He let the number hang in the air. I'm looking at a 60% decline in 18 days. I'm looking at $12 million threatening to walk. Tell me what happened to my machine. Sir, the system required updates to align with current efficiency. Who built that system, Preston? Silence spread across the table like spilled water. I'll say it differently. Keating leaned forward. Give me the name of the person who designed and built the Atlas line right now. Preston's jaw clenched. Diane Crawford, seated halfway down the table, felt the weight of the moment press against her ribs like a hand. She'd watched this disaster building for weeks. She'd stayed quiet because she had a mortgage and a daughter in college, and because Preston Hargrove had made very clear what happened to people who disagreed with him. But $12 million was $12 million. And Fletcher Boyd was Fletcher Boyd. Diane straightened in her chair. His name is Fletcher Boyd. Her voice carried clean across the room. He designed the Atlas line from scratch. Every component, every calibration protocol, every diagnostic system, he built it over 3 years while holding the title of senior maintenance technician. The boardroom went still. And 6 weeks ago, Diane continued, Mr. Hargrove terminated his employment and replaced him with Mr. Sullivan. Lawrence Keating turned his gaze on Preston like a searchlight finding a target. You fired the man who built the Atlas line. He was maintenance staff, Lawrence. He didn't have the credentials. I didn't ask about credentials. I asked whether you fired the man who built the machine responsible for 40% of our revenue. Preston opened his mouth. Nothing useful came out. Keating picked up the phone in the center of the conference table and dialed a number from memory. Conrad, it's Lawrence Keating. I need you at my plant tomorrow morning. Bring your tools. Dr. Conrad Whitfield arrived at 7 the next morning. He was 68 years old. He held 9 patents in industrial automation. He had consulted for 3 of the largest manufacturing firms in the country. His textbook on integrated production systems was required reading at every major engineering program in North America. When Whitfield said a machine was extraordinary, careers were made. When he said it was broken, careers ended. Whitfield spent 4 hours with the Atlas line. He opened every panel. He ran every diagnostic test the system would allow. He traced each hydraulic line with his fingers and listened to each motor with a stethoscope he'd carried since 1984. When he returned to the boardroom, everyone was waiting. Who built this? His voice was quiet, almost reverent. A man named Fletcher Boyd, Diane said. Is he here? He was terminated 6 weeks ago. Whitfield removed his glasses, cleaned them slowly and put them back on. This is without exaggeration the most elegantly engineered production system I have seen in 40 years of consulting. Whoever built it is operating at a level most graduate programs don't teach. He paused to let the words land. You need to bring him back today because whoever has been modifying this machine is systematically destroying it. Every head in the room turned toward Garrett Sullivan. Garrett's face went the color of old cement. Lawrence Keating rose from his chair. At 81, standing was a statement. Preston, call Fletcher Boyd. Get him in this building tomorrow morning, and if he says no, you go to his front door and ask him in person. Fletcher got the call from Diane Crawford at 6 o'clock in the morning. He was underneath a neighbor's Chevy pickup replacing a rusted brake line for $40. It was the 3rd car he'd fixed that week. Word had spread through the neighborhood. The quiet man in the duplex on Elm Street could fix anything mechanical for whatever you could afford. It wasn't enough. Nowhere close to enough. But it kept the lights on and Naomi fed. Fletcher. Diane's voice was tight and careful. I need you to hear me out before you say anything. I'm listening. The Atlas line is failing. Garrett can't fix it. The board has seen it. Dr. Conrad Whitfield has inspected the machine personally. Lawrence Keating himself is asking for you. Fletcher slid out from under the truck. He sat on the cold driveway with the phone pressed to his ear and grease on his knuckles. The same hands. The same grease. The same man Preston Hargrove had called an illiterate janitor. Asking for me, he let the word sit. Preston Hargrove is asking for me. Not asking. Keating is ordering him to ask. Fletcher closed his eyes. He thought about Naomi, about the savings account shrinking from 6 weeks to 4, about the kitchen faucet he still hadn't fixed. About his badge sitting on the nightstand next to Earl's photograph. I'll come, Fletcher said, but I have conditions. Name them. I walk through the front door, not the service entrance. I get full access to the factory floor. No escort, no supervisor looking over my shoulder. Nobody tells me what I'm doing wrong. Done. One more thing. Garrett Sullivan stays in the room the entire time. I want him to see everything. Fletcher arrived at Greyfield Industries at 8 the next morning. He wore clean work clothes and steel-toed boots. Earl's wrench was in his back pocket. Not because he needed it for the job. Because it was Earl. The factory floor was quiet the way a hospital gets quiet when the monitors stop beeping. Workers lined the edges, pressed against walls and machinery. Diane Crawford stood near the main office entrance. 3 board members watched from the observation rail on the mezzanine. Lawrence Keating sat in a metal folding chair someone had carried down from the conference room. Dr. Con Whitfield leaned against the support column with his arms crossed, watching everything. And Preston Hargrove stood in the far back corner, hands in his pockets, jaw set tight enough to crack teeth. Garrett Sullivan waited beside the Atlas line. The machine shuddered every few seconds like a car with bad timing. Warning lights blinked across the control panel in patterns nobody could decode. A distress signal with no translator. Fletcher didn't greet anyone. He walked straight to the Atlas line. He stood in front of it. He placed both palms flat against the primary drive unit housing and closed his eyes. The room watched a man listen to a machine. 30 seconds. A minute. 2. Fletcher opened his eyes. You replaced the harmonic dampeners on cylinders 2 through 6. He said it to Garrett without looking at him. Standard Kessler units off the shelf. Garrett stiffened. They were upgraded. The originals were non-standard parts. They were non-standard because I made them non-standard. Fletcher opened the side access panel with a flathead screwdriver from his belt. The Atlas line doesn't run on factory dampening frequencies. I tuned each dampener to match the resonance profile of the entire integrated system. Every component calibrated to every other component. One pulse, one rhythm. He pulled out one of Garrett's replacement dampeners and held it up for the room to see. This is a fine part, well-manufactured, industry standard, and it's killing the machine. He turned it in his hand. You put a metronome inside a jazz band. Fletcher reached into his toolbox and pulled out a handmade dampener identical to the originals he'd fabricated 3 years earlier. He installed it in cylinder 2. The shuttering on that bank stopped immediately like a fever breaking. Within 20 minutes, Fletcher had replaced all 5 dampeners. The Atlas line's tremors smoothed out like a wrinkled sheet pulled taut. The warning lights on the primary bank went dark one by one in sequence. Dr. Whitfield pushed off the column and stepped closer. His expression hadn't changed, but something behind his eyes had shifted. How did you identify the resonance mismatch without running a single diagnostic test? Whitfield asked. Fletcher tapped the machine housing. My grandfather used to say, a machine tells you what's wrong if you know how to listen. I built this system to speak. I know what it sounds like when it's healthy. He paused. And I know what it sounds like when it's in pain. That was the first revelation, and the look on Garrett Sullivan's face said he was only now beginning to understand how deep the water was. A murmur rippled through the workers along the walls. Some of them had been at Greyfield long enough to remember Fletcher building those dampeners by hand. They'd watched him test them at midnight alone on the floor, adjusting each one by ear until the vibration profile matched his design. Nobody had called it engineering back then. They called it Fletcher being Fletcher. Fletcher moved to the rear of the Atlas line. He crouched low and ran his fingers along the base panel until he found a seam that didn't appear on any schematic. He pressed 2 points simultaneously, and a hidden access panel clicked open with a soft hiss of released air. Inside sat a module roughly the size of a shoebox. It was wired into the Atlas line's central nervous system, connected to every sensor, every actuator, every thermal monitor across the entire production chain. A small green LED on its face pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm like a heartbeat. What is that? Whitfield was beside Fletcher now, down on one knee, peering into the compartment. I call it the pulse. Fletcher connected a data cable to a laptop he'd brought from home. Numbers began scrolling across the screen immediately. It's a self-diagnostic archive. I built it into the Atlas line during the 3rd month of construction. It monitors every subsystem in real time. Stress loads, thermal drift, vibration patterns, pressure differentials across every hydraulic channel. Everything this machine feels gets recorded here. Garrett stepped closer. His face was drawn tight. There's nothing about this in the blueprints. Because I built it from my head. Fletcher scrolled through weeks of log data. The Pulse has recorded every single change made to this machine since the day it went online. Every adjustment, every part replacement, every parameter shift. He turned the screen toward Whitfield, including every modification made in the last 18 days. The logs told a story of cascading failure. Every change Garrett had implemented, the dampener replacements, the recalibrated pressure thresholds, the updated control parameters, had triggered compounding fault conditions. The machine had been calling for help in the only language it had. The Pulse had captured every cry. Nobody had known it existed. Whitfield read the scrolling data in silence for a full minute. Then he stood. You embedded a black box into an integrated production system, Whitfield said slowly. A self-recording diagnostic archive that monitors the entire platform continuously and autonomously. Yes, sir. I have consulted for Boeing, General Electric, and Siemens. I have personally reviewed systems on 4 continents. Whitfield's voice dropped low. None of them have implemented anything this comprehensive at the individual system level. Not one. Fletcher was already moving. He didn't wait for compliments. He was reaching for the next thing. The final revelation began when Fletcher walked to the main control panel and entered a command sequence that nobody in the room recognized. The display screen shifted. A menu appeared that existed in no operating manual. 3 operating modes listed vertically. Standard, adaptive, full integration. The Atlas line had run in standard mode for its entire working life. That was the only mode anyone at Greyfield knew existed. Fletcher selected adaptive. The machine shifted. Not louder. Not quieter. Different. The mechanical rhythm that had been predictable and steady became something else, something fluid and almost organic. The production line began adjusting itself in real time, modifying speeds and pressures based on the physical properties of each component passing through. What's happening? Keating leaned forward in his folding chair. The Atlas line was never just a production system. Fletcher's voice was calm and clear. I designed it to learn. In adaptive mode, it reads the density and grain structure of incoming materials and adjusts its own machining parameters automatically. Different alloys it recalibrates. Different thickness it compensates. No human input required. He picked up 3 sample billets from the materials cage beside the line. Aluminum. Stainless steel. Titanium alloy. 3 different metals with 3 completely different machining requirements. He fed them through the system one after another without changing a single setting. The Atlas line processed each one flawlessly. Perfect tolerances. 0 defects. The machine simply understood what it was working with and adapted on its own. That's not possible, Garrett said. His voice was barely a whisper. Adaptive processing at this precision requires neural network integration and multi-tensor fusion architecture. The hardware alone costs hundreds of thousands. It costs whatever I had in the spare parts cage in 3 months of late nights. Fletcher closed the hidden panel. I didn't have a budget, Garrett. I didn't have a team. I had time and my grandfather's philosophy. He looked at the machine. Fix it so it fixes itself. The factory floor was silent. Not uncomfortable silence. Something deeper. The silence of people watching something they didn't fully understand, but knew was extraordinary. Dr. Conrad Whitfield turned from the Atlas line to face the board members on the mezzanine. When he spoke, his voice carried across the entire floor. I want to be very precise about what I'm about to say. In 40 years of consulting across 12 countries and every major industrial manufacturer on this continent, I have never seen a single engineer production system this sophisticated. He let the sentence settle. You didn't fire a maintenance technician. You fired one of the most brilliant mechanical engineers I have ever encountered in my career. And you replaced him with someone who did not understand what he was looking at. Nobody moved. In the back corner, Preston Hargrove's face was the color of old paper. Lawrence Keating rose from his folding chair. The metal legs scraped against the factory floor. The sound cut through the silence like a blade across glass. Nobody leaves. His voice was calm. The authority behind it was absolute. This is not over. He turned to Fletcher. I want a full demonstration. Every feature, every capability, everything that was built into this machine and never documented because the man who built it was treated like he didn't exist. Fletcher nodded. Over the next 90 minutes, Fletcher ran the Atlas line through every system he had designed. The adaptive material processing, the self-diagnostic archive and its 3 years of continuous data, the automated quality verification module that could flag a defective component mid-cycle and reroute it without stopping the line. The predictive maintenance system could identify which bearing would fail 14 days before it happened. Features that could have been marketed, patented, licensed for millions. Features that existed only because one man had built them in silence after hours on a maintenance technician's salary, with no recognition and no resources beyond what he could find in the spare parts cage. Board members on the mezzanine had stopped taking notes. They were simply watching Fletcher's hands move across the controls with the fluency of a musician playing an instrument he had built himself. At one point, Fletcher activated a subsystem that predicted tooling wear based on vibration signatures. The screen displayed a maintenance forecast 6 months into the future. Every bearing, every belt, every bushing mapped and scheduled for replacement before it could fail. I built this so nobody would ever have to guess, Fletcher said quietly, more to the machine than to the room. Guessing is how people get hurt. Whitfield stood beside him, watching the forecast cycle through its predictions. He hadn't spoken in 20 minutes. When he finally did, his voice was thick. In 4 decades, I have never seen preventive maintenance modeled at this resolution by a single-point system. This alone is worth a patent. Fletcher just moved to the next feature. When the demonstration ended, Keating turned to Preston Hargrove. I have one question for you. Preston stood rigid against the back wall. His suit looked like it was the only thing holding him upright. Fletcher Boyd submitted detailed documentation of every modification and system he designed for the Atlas line. Monthly reports, system specifications, engineering summaries. Keating held up a document. Diane Crawford just provided me with copies of every report Fletcher filed over 3 years. Each one is stamped by your office, he read from the page. Unnecessary. No action required. That's what you wrote on a report describing a self-adaptive manufacturing system that doesn't exist anywhere else in this industry. Lawrence, I was streamlining documentation workflows. A maintenance technician filing engineering reports was outside the established scope of outside the scope. Keating's voice dropped to something cold and heavy. Let me tell you what was outside the scope. Preston terminating 8 experienced workers in 6 weeks. Firing the man who built the only machine keeping this company solvent. Burying his engineering reports because you could not accept that a black man without a college degree might be more brilliant than everyone you've ever hired. The word hung in the air. Black. Said out loud in front of the full board. Not whispered in a corridor. Not coded in corporate language. Stated as the fact it was in a room full of people who could no longer pretend they hadn't noticed the pattern. Preston's face went from white to deep red. That is absolutely not. Darnell Williams, Sheila Monroe, Terrence Oakes, James Campbell, Ruth Dixon, Calvin Harrell. Diane Crawford read the names from a printed list, steady and clear. All terminated in your first 6 weeks. All replaced by workers with less experience. All sharing one characteristic that I believe everyone in this room can identify without assistance. Fletcher stood beside the Atlas line. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The machine hummed behind him, running flawlessly under his hands, broken under anyone else's. It said everything words couldn't. Whitfield stepped forward. I'll add one final observation. The diagnostic logs from the Pulse module confirm that every report Fletcher Boyd submitted corresponds directly to a recorded system event. His documentation was meticulous, accurate, and systematically suppressed. He looked at Preston Hargrove. This man's work was buried, and I believe every person in this room understands exactly why. Now, if you've watched this far, if you felt what Fletcher felt, I need you to do something. Drop a comment below. Tell me if you were Fletcher Boyd standing in that factory watching the man who called you an illiterate grease rat finally face the truth. Would you stay or would you walk away for good? Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe because the ending of this story is something you won't want to miss. The boardroom emptied. The factory floor cleared. 3 people remained. Lawrence Keating, Dr. Conrad Whitfield, and Fletcher Boyd. They sat in Gene Crawford's old office, the one Preston had redecorated with chrome furniture and frosted glass panels. Someone brought 3 cups of coffee in plain ceramic mugs from the break room. Keating drank from his without comment. He wasn't a man who cared about cups. Fletcher. Keating set his mug down carefully. I owe you an apology that no words can make adequate. What happened to you in this building was wrong, professionally, ethically, personally. Fletcher held his coffee. He didn't drink. I'd like to offer you the position of chief engineer at Greyfield Industries, full authority over the Atlas line and all future systems development. Compensation that reflects the actual value you've created for this company. Keating paused. Which is, for the record, considerable. Whitfield leaned forward. And I want to extend a parallel offer, Fletcher. I run a consulting firm that partners with the largest manufacturers in the country. I'm offering you a senior consulting role. Your name on the publications, your methods in the curriculum. Fletcher looked at both men. 2 of the most powerful people he had ever sat across from, offering him everything that 6 years of silence and swallowed pride had never earned. He thought about Earl, about Naomi's popsicle stick bridge on the kitchen counter, about the dripping faucet he'd finally fixed last week, about the badge that still sat on his nightstand next to his grandfather's photograph. Mr. Keating, Fletcher said, I appreciate both offers more than I can say. He set his coffee down. But I built the Atlas line in this building. This is where the work lives. This is home. He paused. I'll take the chief engineer position on 2 conditions. Name them. First, every worker who was terminated under Preston Hargrove receives a phone call. Every single one. I can't guarantee they'll come back, but they deserve the choice. Keating nodded without hesitation. Done. Second. Fletcher's voice was steady. My name goes on the Atlas line blueprints where it should have been from the beginning. It'll be there by end of day. Fletcher Boyd stood and shook Lawrence Keating's hand, then Whitfield's. His grip was firm. Not triumphant. Not bitter. Steady. The grip of a man who had finally been seen for exactly who he was. The board voted unanimously the following week. Preston Hargrove was removed as CEO of Greyfield Industries. The official motion cited gross mismanagement of human capital and systematic suppression of critical engineering documentation. Those were the clean words. Everyone in the room understood the real ones. An internal investigation followed. The findings were thorough and damning. Under Preston's 8-week tenure, 12 experienced employees had been terminated. 10 were racial minorities. Their replacements in every case had less hands-on experience. Performance metrics had declined across every affected department. The pattern was not subtle. It was not ambiguous. It was exactly what it looked like. Preston's severance package, originally structured at $1.2 million, was voided under the misconduct clause buried in paragraph 9 of his employment contract. His attorney filed a formal objection. The board's legal team responded with the Pulse diagnostic logs, Diane Crawford's archive of suppressed reports, and sworn statements from 6 of the terminated employees. Preston's attorney withdrew the objection within 8 days. Garrett Sullivan submitted his resignation the morning after the board vote. He didn't hold a press conference. He didn't issue a statement. He packed his office quietly the same way Darnell Williams, Sheila Monroe, and Terrence Oakes had packed theirs weeks earlier. The silence of a man leaving a place where he no longer belonged. But before he walked out, Garrett did something nobody expected. He found Fletcher alone in the maintenance bay, recalibrating the Atlas line's thermal array. I didn't know, Garrett said from the doorway, his hands hung at his sides, about the Pulse, the adaptive system. None of it. Preston told me the Atlas line was legacy equipment running outdated protocols. He said you were maintenance staff that I was brought in to modernize. Fletcher kept working for a moment. Then he set down his wrench. And you believe that? I wanted to believe I was the best person for the job. Fletcher looked at him directly. You're not a bad engineer, Garrett. You're just not a humble one. You walked in here and assumed 3 patents meant you understood a machine you'd never touched. He paused. Next time someone tries to show you how something works, let them finish. Garrett stood there for a long moment. Then he nodded once and walked out of Greyfield Industries for the last time. Word traveled through the industry the way it always does, quietly at first, then all at once. Preston Hargrove's name became a cautionary tale, not the kind taught in business schools, but the kind whispered in hiring committees and boardroom hallways. The CEO who fired his best engineer because of the color of his skin and nearly killed the company in the process. Henderson Corporation didn't just renew their contract. They expanded it. The new agreement was worth $15 million annually, $3 million more than the original deal. The procurement director called Keating personally. Whatever you did to fix things, keep doing it. I didn't fix anything, Keating said. I just stopped breaking what was already working. Darnell Williams came back. So did Sheila Monroe and Terrence Oakes. Not all 12 answered the call. Some had moved on. Some had built new lives. Some couldn't bring themselves to walk through those doors again because the memory of being discarded doesn't wash off easily. But the ones who returned found a different Greyfield waiting for them. One where the chief engineer was a man who'd built the best machine in the building from spare parts and a dead man's philosophy. 6 months later, Fletcher Boyd stood in his office on the mezzanine above the factory floor. Below him, the Atlas line hummed at full capacity. 0 defects. Clean rhythm. The steady pulse of a machine that knew exactly what it was built to do. On his desk, next to a framed photograph of Naomi building her popsicle stick bridge, sat a worn socket wrench with a wooden handle darkened by decades of grip. Earl's wrench. The only inheritance that ever mattered. Naomi visited that afternoon. She stood at the observation rail watching the Atlas line work, eyes wide and full of wonder. You built that, Daddy? Yeah, baby girl. I built that. She reached for his hand and held it tight. Can you teach me? Fletcher Boyd smiled. Fix it once. Fix it right. Fix it so it fixes itself. If this story moved you, if you believe talent deserves to be recognized no matter where it comes from, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to this channel for more stories like this and leave a comment below. Have you ever been underestimated because of the way you looked, where you came from, or what was missing from your resume? Tell me your story. I'll be reading every one.